Hello, and thank you for joining us for this broadcast of Exploring Implicit Bias in the History Social Science Classroom. My name is Michelle Herzog. I'm the Coordinator 3 for History Social Science here at the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and just thrilled to bring you this broadcast, which consists of 3 modules. Module 1 with Michael Sabin focused on using inquiry in ethnic studies. It had 4 parts, certainly worth watching. I hope you have a chance to view it. Module 2, which we are going to go into right now, is on developing mindsets, skill sets, and exploring bias with my good friend Sandra Line, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. Module 3 goes further in exploring ethnic transformations in California with Barbara Doughton. But today, right now, we're going to start with Module 2. It has 4 parts, and Part 1 is the overview and developing positive mindsets through teachers, students, and community. From this part, we'll go to Part 2 on developing skill sets in classrooms. Part 3 will focus on addressing difficult conversations in classrooms. And Part 4 will be about navigating difficult conversations about ethnic studies with adults, your colleagues, or even the community. So I'm very excited and very happy to have my good friend and colleague Sandra Line with us. Sandra has extensive classroom experience with LA Unified. She's been a mentor, teacher, leader in the community, continues to do great work as a consultant to LACO, and along with Michael Sabin and Barbara Doughton have conducted a number of in-person trainings for us here at LACO. So, Sandra, thank you so much for joining us today and all your hard work in putting together this module.
Thank you, Michelle. One of the things that we talk about when we're talking about ethnic studies is the fact that our classrooms are so diverse, and it's so important to have the right mindset when you are in that classroom, and that mindset really comes from 3 distinct areas: from the teachers, from the students, and from the community. And so the first module that we're going to be talking about is how do those 3 things coalesce to help teachers when they are dealing with ethnic studies. By affirming this, the benefits of the identities and contributions of marginalized groups in our society, ethnic studies help students to see themselves in each other as part of a narrative of the United States. One of the things that we need to consider when we're looking at mindsets is how are positive mindsets created, and how does the community influence mindsets? Frequently, as history social science teachers, we're interested in the content, and we want to get the content across, and sometimes we don't really consider some of the outside forces that impact our students and can impede their learning. And what we need to do when we're talking about ethnic studies is make sure that we're cognizant of all of those areas.
So yeah, I think you're right, Sandy. We've always known the importance of knowing your students and who they are, but as you're saying, it takes on added importance, particularly in the context of ethnic studies.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we need, one of the main components of developing a mindset is the teacher mindset. What are the things that the teacher is coming with? What is their background? What is their content knowledge? How do they create a warm and welcoming classroom for the students so they're all going to feel comfortable together? And those are things that we have to think about very seriously, because our students are coming to us with such diverse backgrounds that we need to recognize how they impact in the classroom.
I think you're right about teacher mindsets, and they change over time too. Wouldn't you
Absolutely.
agree? I think about my mindset my first year teaching, how different it was 2 years in, 5, 10, 15 years in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember my first year of teaching, I did not really kind of know about the community in which I was teaching. Those were things that I never even considered. But as I grew as a teacher, it was like, these students are bringing to the classroom things that I had not considered and that I needed to be able to consider so that they would feel comfortable with me. And as our classrooms become more and more diverse, it's really important that we recognize what our students bring to us and how we react to them. And those mindsets then can come together to create a really rich environment and classroom for our students. The mindsets for the students are also critical thinking skills. What are they bringing to the classroom? They're not just sitting and getting information. They are bringing their whole background, their community, their culture, their language. All of those things come into the classroom and need to be recognized by the teacher, especially in the area of ethnic studies. One of the things that we need to think about, too, when we're talking about our young people. When we develop a comfortable classroom, students and teachers need to be able to trust each other.
Yes.
It needs to be a safe place. When a student comes to your classroom, are they really comfortable in that classroom? Knowing that what they say and how they react, it's a safe place. They also learn how to value their own identities and their differences and learn about multiple perspectives. And they also have to be brave enough to take risks. And teacher mindsets help develop that kind of a classroom.
I think what you're saying is really important, Sandy, but it takes time sometimes to develop that trust. I wouldn't delve into some real sensitive issues the first few days or first few weeks of
Oh, I
school,
agree.
right? You want to take your time and get to know them and establish that, which is hard if you've got 5, 6 periods of kids coming in
Absolutely.
every day. In an
Absolutely.
elementary setting, sometimes it's a little easier to do that. So it's great that you highlighted that. So you talk about knowing their community, know where they are. I was lucky for many years because I taught in a school that was 2 blocks from my house, right? So I knew the community, right? And I was a big part of it, and they all knew where I lived. But for most teachers, not the case. We drive in, we drive out. So talk a little more about the influence and the importance of the community in influencing mindsets.
I'm so glad you mentioned this, Michelle, because when you talk about driving to school and driving home, so many people take the same route every day.
Yes.
And so they don't even know the 6-block radius around the school. They don't know if there are health services. They don't know about any religious institutions. They don't know about any of the mom and pop stores in the area. So they really may not have a sense of the community or what the community has to offer. So it's really important to be able to understand your students is to know the community from which they come, because those are factors that influence them. Just as when we were raised, our community, our family influenced us in the classroom. Our students are coming to us the same way. And so it's really important that we understand the community. We also need to know about the community because we want to know about the different cultural backgrounds of our students. Which ethnicity has been there the longest? Who are the new ethnicities that are moving in? What are the cultural things that they're bringing, like holidays or foods or different languages? All of those impact on the learning of the students. And those are the things that we have to recognize in the classroom that not only makes our job maybe a little bit more complex, but it also makes our job richer because of all of these wonderful things that these diverse students can bring to us. So one of the things you need to know is, what languages do they speak? Most of our students coming to us now are multilingual. I feel so ignorant because I am not multilingual, and I'm talking to young people who have multiple languages that they can draw on. Are they new to the community? Some students who come to our community are totally isolated because they may be the only new family in that community of that ethnicity. I think about some of our migrant folks, those who are coming from the Ukraine or those who are coming from Africa, who may settle in our neighborhoods and they have nobody with whom to connect. And so those are critical things to think about. What are the holidays they celebrate? And why is that important? One of the things that I think we don't think about is that we as teachers plan tests or activities and don't consider that maybe they will conflict with a national holiday or a day where the students will not be there. And so those are things that we have to consider that we haven't thought about before.
Because it sends a strong message that you're not planning big, exciting things on a day where students may be out for
Absolutely.
religious reasons, cultural reasons, or
Absolutely.
even, a family thing.
That's
So yeah.
that's a really good
Yeah,
point.
and people pay attention to that.
Exactly, they do. And we so often as teachers have this kind of timeline and pacing plan that we're not even taking into consideration some of those issues. What is their family situation? Is this a one-parent family? Are these young people being raised by other family members and parents are not around? That's a big issue. And some of our students are homeless. We need to know about that also. When I was teaching, I had a young man who was living in his car.
Yes.
And so that was something I had to consider when I was working with him.
And what kind of homework you're assigning.
Exactly.
And access to technology.
Absolutely.
And all of that. Yes.
Absolutely. What about outside interests? So many of our young people who are coming to us today are really big soccer fans because soccer is a big sport worldwide.
Yes.
Well, if we're only talking about American football, we're not connecting with them. So we want to connect with them even in their outside interests too. And do they appear comfortable in the classroom? When I was started teaching, we had all of our students in rows. And the kids who were not comfortable sat in the last seat, in the last row, because they knew they could hide. So those are the things we need to know the students who want to hide and how to incorporate them into our community.
So I think all of this you're talking about influences, we need to check our own biases.
Yes, and we will talk about that quite a bit in Module 4, because that is one of the things that we as teachers sometimes think we're not biased, but we all are.
We all are. We mentioned in Module 1 with Michael, Dr. Brian T. Marks, who says we all come with bias. And just to paraphrase, he says, if you have a brain and you live in society, you have bias.
Right.
Whether you want to, and it's not your fault, but information comes to you and you form opinions. And checking them, getting them understood, and then addressing them. That's where the important work is. So if you have kids out for days, you can't have a bias against that. They're obligated. If you have kids commemorating Ramadan, and they're not eating all day and not as attentive as they should be, do you have a bias against that or for that?
Right.
Are you understanding it? I think
Right.
it all feeds into that.
And the interesting thing when you mention bias is something that we learn in our earliest years. Messages that we get from parents or family members that we're not even realizing that we're getting
sure.
and incorporating. And so then later on in life, all of a sudden, we take a look at this and think, where did that come from? But one of the things that helps teachers understand their students is something called the iceberg of culture. And the iceberg of culture talks about how there are very visible things that students will show about their culture that you can see right away. That's the part of the iceberg that's above the surface.
Visible.
Yes, it's the things like, their dress and their language and so forth. But underneath, there are things about their culture that may not be obvious to us. For example, there are some students who don't want to be touched. And so that could be a cultural thing. There's another thing about some students who, when you are disciplining them, will not look you in the eye. And it's not because they're not listening, it's because culturally they were taught it was disrespectful to look an adult straight in the eye. So those are things we need to learn and understand so we can make our students feel as comfortable as possible.
I think the iceberg metaphor is a great one because there's so many things hidden. Sexual orientation, religion, belief system, socioeconomic status, all of these things. Some we choose to hide, but some are invisible anyway.
Absolutely.
It's more than just an ethnicity.
Right. And the other point that I would like to make about that is the very deep culture. Students may react without knowing why they're reacting in a particular way because it's a deep cultural learning that they haven't even thought about. This is just the
It's
way I am.
hardwired. It's
Yes,
hardwired.
exactly.
Yes.
So that the metaphor of the iceberg is really a good one. Also, all of these things that our students bring to us make our classrooms richer. It makes the study of the things that we're talking about as ethnic studies more exciting because it's not one perspective. And I think in this time of our lives, we need to recognize multiple perspectives and the fact that everyone has something to offer to us. One of the things that teachers may not think about are called the rings of culture. And if you notice on this, we're talking about age, gender, ethnicity, and so forth. But think about your early years when you were teaching. You thought gender, okay, I've got 5 boys and 24 girls, whatever. They're all 17, and they look like perhaps they're this particular ethnicity. But I knew nothing about their religion. I didn't know anything about their orientation. And what I needed to do is I needed to learn more about them. So one of the things about ethnic studies is the fact that teacher mindsets have to be influenced by these rings of culture because we need to learn from our students also, and we need to learn about them.
So, as you're saying, mindset is influenced by a number of factors, number of identities, some visible, many invisible. But what can we do in the classroom to understand and respect the different mindsets of our students?
What we need to do is we need to make those classrooms so welcoming and so diverse that every student who comes into our classroom feels welcome. That's a hard thing to do, but it's something that we need to think about. So first of all, we want to think about what is the message? When the kids come into your classroom that first day, what do they see and what do they feel? Is the classroom set up in a collaborative way? Or are they just sitting in rows? Are there pods of 4 or pods of 6 so that they can face one another and work together? Those are all things. Are there things that in the classroom, is there a diverse library of books that show different cultures? Are there things in the classroom that reflect the community? If you're in a community that is predominantly one ethnicity, have you brought things from that ethnicity into your classroom to display on the walls to make the students feel comfortable so that you're welcoming them into your home, really, and you want them to feel that welcome?
And there's some subtle things you can do. So we know, talking from teachers and students in the LGBTQ plus community, there's a sensitivity around that. If you just had a little pride flag in the corner of your room, that student's going to notice that and feel their identity is affirmed, that this is a welcoming place.
Absolutely.
There's little things like that you can do.
Those are small but so important things.
Yes.
Because it shows the teacher is aware of the differences that students may bring to the classroom and welcomes them. Another thing is, do we encourage our students to collaborate with one another? Is this something that is fully embraced by the teacher, that the students can collaborate and learn from one another? That's so important, and especially in ethnic studies, because we want different ethnicities to get to know one another and work together. And one of the things about ethnic studies and the curriculum is that as people get to know each other as individuals, some of those stereotypes or preconceived ideas disappear because they learn to see them as individuals and people rather than just part of a larger group where you have no connection to them. So that's important. And then you need to think about the arrangement of your room. Is the room working for collaboration? And that's just kind of a good way to take a look at it. And one of the things you can do is ask your colleagues to come into your classroom and kind of do a little bit of an assessment about an explicit message or an implicit message. How do you have your classroom set up? How is it working for one another? And then you need to ask yourself this question: how do I teach? Because some teachers teach to the right. And so when you're teaching to the right,
I mean, the right side of the room.
Yes, you're missing the whole left side of the classroom.
I found myself doing that.
And teachers sometimes aren't even
Not
aware
even
of
aware.
that. And so it's, where do you position yourself so everyone in the classroom feels like you are speaking to them and they are included in your community?
Yes.
That's a critical point, and I think it's a point that a lot of teachers are not even aware of
Yes.
when they are teaching. So according to the ethnic studies curriculum, When schools help students acquire a social consciousness, a conscious awareness of being part of an interrelated community of others, they are better equipped to contribute to the public good and to help strengthen democratic institutions. One of the big issues that we're facing is that people of my generation vote for everything. If there's an election for dog catcher, we're there. And the younger kids, the young
Yeah,
people,
not
they
so
don't
much.
vote because they don't see the impact or they don't feel represented by the society as a whole. So, one of the things is getting kids to know one another and understand that they have a valued place in community will help them take more an active role in participating in the community, which I think is critical and really one of the focuses of ethnic studies.
Well, we talked a lot about that in Module 1. One of the primary goals is for the students to become civically engaged and
Absolutely.
working with democratic institutions, which, of course, understanding that voting is really important, even at the local level.
Absolutely.
Why are the streets aligned this way? Why aren't there more services in my neighborhood for homeless, for health care, for fresh food, food deserts we're learning about? Who makes those decisions? It's your
Absolutely.
local city councils, right? Local school boards for schools, local government.
But if students don't feel recognized
True.
and don't feel like they have a valued place in society, they're not invested in voting
Yes.
because they figure nobody sees them. And the only way that they're going to be seen is if they know that they are integral to the community. And it starts at the classroom. That is the community that we start with. And then how are they feeling involved in the school? And then how are they feeling involved in their neighborhood? All of those things lead to civic action. And if we don't start in the classroom, then we're missing a big opportunity to help people feel welcome here in the United States.
I agree.
So, once again, our public schools need to promote understanding and appreciation of diverse populations because that is an essential part of the curriculum that has to be offered to every student. And if we don't do this, we're cheating them. And that's one thing as teachers we can't do. We can't set the bar too low. We can't underestimate their abilities. We can't disregard the gifts that they bring to us in the classroom. And so, ethnic studies is such a wonderful opportunity to introduce students of different cultures to one another so that they feel, all of them, that they are part of a community that is worthwhile working with.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So thank you so much for this overview for part 2, Sandy. Anyone who's ever spent time in the classroom knows how important it is to know your students. But we know how challenging it can be when you've got 180, 200 walking through your door every day. I have background in elementary, so it was easier to get to know them sooner and you really became like a family unit.
Right.
But it is important. But I think, like you say, it takes on added importance in the context of ethnic studies and having them share, get to know one another, and all of that. We're going to go into part 2. Tell us a little bit about what we'll talk about there.
With part 1, we were talking about developing mindsets and how the mindsets are really three-pronged: the teacher, the student, the community. But now we're going to be looking at skill sets. What are the skills that students will need to learn in a classroom where you can start working with them to develop the conversations that they need to have with people of other ethnicities? And so all of section 2 will talk about developing those skill sets so students are able to participate actively in conversations in the classroom.
That'll be really useful. It's one thing to know about it, we got to know how to do it.
That's exactly
We're
right.
all about the practical, right?
Yes.
We've been in classrooms, we know.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to know what to help us on the ground.
Right. And the other thing is that I think was so interesting about Module 1, when Michael was talking about having the right questions,
Yes.
we need to share with our students in Module 2 that I'm going to be talking about how do you ask those questions and how do you develop them on your own? And it's a question that doesn't necessarily have to come from the teacher, but can be generated by the students.
Yes.
And so we need to teach them that
Yes.
skill.
And like you said, if you create that safe space for them to ask those questions, we can have space to talk about them too.
Right.
And reveal some
Right.
things. Bringing back lots of great memories for me. All right, Cindy. Well, thank you so much for part 1 of Module 2, and we will meet again for part 2.
Absolutely.
So thank you for your time.